Picture this. It's the dead of winter in the rugged Montana Rockies back in 1928. Temperatures plunging so low that the very air feels like it could snap your bones in two. And a handful of tough-as-nails hunters are setting up camp for what they swear will be the greatest elk hunt of their lives. A full 12 days deep in the frozen wilderness, where one wrong move means you want come back. Among them is Silas Reed, a quiet, weather-beaten trapper who'd spent more years alone in these mountains than most men had lived. And while the others hauled in heavy iron stoves that clanged and smoked like locomotives, Silas just grabbed his shovel and started digging a strange hole right under where his canvas tent would go. A pit that looked more like a grave than anything useful for staying alive in -40 cold. The younger hunters, city boys mostly, with their fancy rifles and big talk, couldn't stop laughing at him, calling it the dumbest thing they'd ever seen, saying he'd defreeze solid before the first night was through, because who in their right mind buries a fire underground, instead of keeping it roaring right there in the open where you can see it and feed it logs all night long. Silas didn't argue much. He just kept working with that slow, deliberate way of his, lining the pit with flat river stones he'd hauled from a nearby creek, carving out a narrow tunnel that slanted upward to let air rush in like a natural chimney, and then connecting it all, so the smoke would snake out through a bent pipe that poked harmlessly through the tent flap without filling the whole space with choking fumes the way their iron monsters did. He explained in his gravelly voice that the ground itself would soak up the heat like a sponge. The stones would hold it for hours, even after the flames died down, and the warmth would rise gentle and steady through the dirt floor, turning the tent into something almost cozy, no matter how fierce the wind screamed outside. They mocked him harder then. One of them even betting a whole case of whiskey that Silas's tent would be colder than a witch's heart by morning, while theirs stayed toasty with just a few armloads of wood. As the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks and the first flurries of snow began to swirl, the group split off to their own setups, stoking their stoves until the tents glowed orange from within. But Silas lit his underground fire with just a handful of dry kindling and a few split logs, watching as the flames disappeared into the earth and the ground beneath his boots started to radiate a soft, living heat that made the air inside feel like springtime compared to the biting chill just a few feet away. Feeling the surprising warmth and grumbling that it was probably just luck. But deep down you could see the first cracks in their confidence as the night wore on and the temperature outside kept dropping like a stone. Little did any of them realize that this was only the beginning, that a storm bigger than anything they'd faced was rolling in from the north, the kind that could bury a man alive and turn even the best laid plans into a fight for survival, and that Silas's buried stove was about to prove itself in ways that would leave every last one of them speechless before the 12 days were done. By the third day, the blizzard had swallowed the mountains whole, winds howling like wounded beasts and snow piling up so high that the tents looked like white ghosts half buried in the drifts. And the hunters who had laughed at Silas were now regretting every single joke as their iron stoves burned through wood faster than they could chop it, the heat escaping through every seam and crack while the cold seeped back in the moment the flames dipped low, feeding the fire constantly just to keep their fingers from going numb. But even then, the temperature inside barely climbed above freezing, and their supplies starting to run low, because dragging more logs through the whiteout was like trying to swim upstream in a river of ice. Silas, meanwhile, sat calm as could be in his own tent. The ground beneath him warmed to the touch from that underground fire he'd built so carefully, the stones holding the heat like a bank holds gold and releasing it slow and steady so that even when he let the flames die down to glowing embers for hours at a time, the air stayed comfortable enough that he could sleep without his boots on and wake up without his joints screaming in protest. Every morning he'd add just a few more logs through the small opening he'd made, the tunnel sucking in fresh air to keep the burn clean and efficient, and the smoke curling out so faintly that it barely left a trace against the storm, while the others cursed their stoves for smoking them out or dying altogether when the wind gusted too hard down the chimneys. They started coming over to his tent more and more, at first just to warm their hands and grumble about the weather. But soon they were asking questions. How the pit worked, why the ground didn't just suck all the heat away into the frozen earth, and Silas would explain in that patient way of his that the stones acted like a giant battery, soaking up the fire's energy and radiating it back upward through the canvas floor, turning the very dirt into a radiator that no blizzard could touch. One by one they admit the mockery had been foolish, that this old trapper's trick, passed down from the Blackfoot people who'd survived these winters for centuries, was saving their hides when modern gear was failing them left and right. And as the days stretched on with no break in the storm, the group began to rely on Silas's tent as their gathering place, sharing stories around the gentle warmth while outside the world turned white and merciless. But even as the camaraderie grew and the elk hunt turned into a distant memory, A new worry started to creep in, because their food was running dangerously low. The wood supply was dwindling faster than expected, and the question hung heavy in the warm air. Could Silas's underground stove keep them going all the way to the end of the 12 days, or would the storm claim them, after all? When even his clever invention finally reached its limit in the face of nature's raw fury, on the 12th day, when the storm finally broke and the sun pierced through the clouds like a long-lost friend, the hunters emerged from their snowbound camp looking like ghosts of the men who'd started the trip. Thinner and quieter but alive, every last one of them, thanks in no small part to the steady, unyielding warmth that had risen from Silas Reed's underground stove through all those endless nights and days of howling wind and sub-zero cold. They gathered around the now exposed pit, staring at the stones that still held a faint glow from the final embers, amazed at how something so simple, just a hole in the ground lined with rock and fed by a clever draft tunnel, had done what their heavy iron stoves could not, keeping the tent not just survivable but actually comfortable while the world outside tried its hardest to kill them. Silas just shrugged it off with a quiet smile, saying it wasn't magic, just respect for the old ways. Learning from the land and the people who'd been here long before any of them. Using the Earth's own thermal mass to store heat the way a beaver dams a stream to survive the freeze. The group packed up in silence. The mockery long forgotten and replaced by a deep respect that would follow them back to civilization, where they'd tell the tale around barroom fires for years to come, warning young hunters never to laugh at a man's strange ideas until they've seen them tested in the crucible of real wilderness hardship. That story of the underground stove spread through the trapping communities and eventually found its way into old journals and fireside yarns, reminding folks that sometimes the best solutions aren't the loudest or the fanciest, but the ones that work with nature instead of fighting against it, a lesson that still rings true for anyone who ventures into the wild today. If this tale of grit, ingenuity, and quiet triumph in the face of impossible odds hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor and smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow. And while you're at it, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the forgotten stories of survival that shaped our world. Drop a comment below telling me what other historical survival legends you'd love to hear next. Maybe something from the Arctic or the Australian outback, because the more you engage, the more of these incredible real-life adventures I can bring to life for all of us. Thanks for watching. Stay warm out there, and remember, the mountains don't care how fancy your gear is. They only respect the ones who think smarter.